You've made it this far. You have to stay for the last panel now. So we're going to now have representatives from a few of these different sectors all together. I'm going to reintroduce David Kotok because I think he is going to be on this panel. David Kotok, co-founder of Cumberland Advisors, will be online. Chris Castro is joining us again. Once again, he's a sustainability manager for the city of Orlando. We're going to have Ellen Hughes-Cromwick again from Third Way, and Greg Smogard, am I saying that right? Great. Assistant Vice President, Innovation and Biz Dev, Business Development here at USF Sarasota, Manatee. And the moderator for this panel is going to be Stu Waterman, who you also met before.
So really, you know, it's ironic in a way that we have three sectors that we want to get working together, and we have 4 panel members. So obviously we're achieving a little bit of integration already. Is David Kotok, are you on?
Can you hear me?
Yes? David?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
From your perspective, I know that you organize on an annual basis informal meetings that bring together people from a wide variety of backgrounds. So you have some expertise in this area, certainly some interest in bringing different sectors together, different individuals, different specialties. And these days, when we've all become so specialized that it's almost difficult to talk to people who are in different walks of life because they just don't speak the same language that we do anymore. How do you think we can recover a more collegial atmosphere, if you like, to get different sectors working together?
Oh my gosh, that's a great opening question for the next conference and it'll be a 2-day affair. Let me make a suggestion in answering the question. Bob laid out 3 components: academe, public, and private. Ellen, who is a longtime economist friend, and she's evidence of the Jack Benny syndrome because she still looks 39. Made her mark with a prestigious role as an economist with a private company called Ford. And her influence kept Ford out of a bankruptcy and in preparation for a shock. I say Ellen because Bob said private. And we've heard lots of folks here from the academic environment. And we've heard many who are in the area of public government officialdom. I would say we need a 4th category, just a suggestion. And it's evidenced in this conference. And it's the result of success privately, whether it's your own or someone else's, and you're the beneficiary of the success. And that's called philanthropy, which has become such a critical element now. So, Stu, this gives you 4 elements. Now we match the 4 panels. And when you think about putting together the 4 pieces, you begin to get blends from some of them. Bill Gates, philanthropy, seeding now the new version of a nuclear power plant with government providing some of the funding and a private company evolving a 2nd generation of nuclear power. And the site of the plant is an existing coal site in Wyoming. Look how it's
Oh, it's very good. I think in the interest of trying to get back some semblance of schedule, we'll move on to Chris Castro. Are you there? Oh, perhaps not. Ellen, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, good. One of the slides that you presented that struck me was the disparity in battery production between China and basically everybody else on the planet. And obviously there's a strong interest on the part of the automotive industry to repatriate or to patriate battery production into the United States. And Tesla is quite successful doing that, albeit with Japanese partners. But the gap is so large and the Chinese advantage is so great. How do you see stimulating that transfer of technology back into the United States so that we can produce our own batteries in quantity?
Great. Yeah, thanks for that question. I do want to give a nod to David. Thank you for your comments. I do think philanthropy is absolutely critical for a successful transition to clean energy in particular, but to address our climate risks as well. I think we have the ingredients. It's just we had all the muscles, but we stopped stretching them. And I say that because let me give you an example. Everyone knows about ARPA-D. ARPA-D is the innovative arm of the Department of Defense. It obviously was one of the seed innovators for the internet. There are so many technology advances that we thankfully can go back to what the Department of Defense did with ARPA. But how many people know that the Department of Energy modeled a similar function called ARPA-E, which was providing seed capital and looking for innovations and across a broad range of technologies in the energy sector. They have done so much good and actually have given a gift to a lot of investors, especially Chinese investors. So ARPA-E was funding many of these startups in the battery area. And as soon as they got to a viable technology, Chinese investors came in and purchased it, and it disappeared from the US. And we've got to stop doing that. So we've got these muscles, we've stretched them. Again, I'll come back to my comment earlier in the keynote about the national laboratories. How many people know we have a supercomputer that's been installed at Argonne National Lab that is using AI to develop technology that will automatically be able to repurpose batteries for the grid. In a battery cell, one of the big problems that gets created from the fact that you're charging over and over and over again is that it creates dendrites, just like these icicles that begin to form inside the cell. And that can cause fire and it can cause degradation of the battery's capacity. Well, Argonne is figuring out how to, repurpose that cell and then deploy it on the grid using this new technology. So, it is, and I talk to these scientists all the time to understand what is it that we're missing? Why are we filling out the valley of death? What do you need? And they're partnering, they're reaching out to the private sector, but I got to tell you, it's an imperfect recipe right now. And that's one thing I'm dedicated next year to work on, which is, make sure we systematically know how all these pieces fit together. Argonne works with academics, they work with companies. But is it too much of a silo? Do we need to expand it? Do other people know about what they're doing? So that's just an example I think is very instructive about the kinds of muscles that we have to stretch to get to net zero and diminish our climate risk.
That's interesting. I wonder how much of our reduction in carbon output in the U.S. comes from exporting a lot of our industry, our manufacturing industry, to China and Southeast Asia. Perhaps bringing it back will have a little negative impact as well. Do we have Chris? I guess not. So that means that we get to hear from Greg. You're the Vice President for, or Assistant Vice President for Innovation and Business Development here at USF. How do you facilitate the transition of students into the workforce? How do you tailor the student body and their path through the academic process so that they are well positioned to make a contribution when they go into the private sector or into another academic institution?
Well, thank you. First of all, I'd like to say that I get the distinction of being the last person on the last panel of a very long day. So I will do my best to come up with a couple of interesting things. Bob actually wanted me to talk a little bit about entrepreneurship and innovation as well, but Stuart, your question, it's actually interesting because that's one of the things that I personally work on as well. My background is primarily in the corporate world as well as startups and consulting, and so I've been in academia for the last few years. And when I got to meet Dr. Holbrook, who helped me come on board, she said maybe you can help build some bridges and opportunities for our students. So one thing, I'll just give you one example, and we'll talk about, we're always focused on very high impact opportunities for our students, real world, hands-on experience. In the last 2 or 3 semesters, I've been working on a course called Student Consulting. So one of the things that we do is we reach out to companies and organizations, and we put together multidisciplinary teams that students work, and we actually give them real-world problems and work very, very closely with companies and organizations. So that's been very successful. The students have loved it. They have been stretched out of their comfort zone. It really prepares them to take the courses that they've used and apply their expertise. And quite frankly, the feedback from the companies has been really, really good too. I've not yet had a company that's told us they have not actually applied a lot of the recommendations that the students have made. And right now for spring, we have actually move this to the next level, and we are recruiting international companies. So that'll be the next step, is to have our students have an opportunity to work with international companies. So I think that's just one example of how we prepare students for the workforce. Another area that is, we just finished a couple of workshops for the public, but we have a program here on critical thinking and creative design thinking. And those programs, those particular skill sets are some of the top skill sets required by companies all over the world. So we're heavily involved in engaging our faculty and students, and also now we're taking out to the public, and especially in the business sector as well. So those are a couple of examples that I'm working on. And I don't know if you have a couple more minutes, I'll talk a little bit more about Bob for the innovation and entrepreneurship side of it. I think Bob mentioned something at the beginning I thought was really important in terms of what the CAC does, and what we're about today is to take very complex data and information and try to kind of bring it down to understandable language and actions. And for innovators, that's really important, because innovators are the ones, and the entrepreneurs are the ones that really have to turn it into action. They're the ones that have to go out and look for solutions, generate startups, and go and put the work into action. So frequently I've run into people when we have discussions about climate change in terms of, well, I'm not too worried about it, because every time we have a crisis, we innovate ourselves out of it. So there are a lot of people that say that, and they depend on innovation, which is true, but I think they fail to look sometimes at the urgency and the magnitude of what that is. So that puts a lot of pressure on innovators and entrepreneurs to figure this out. So when I was preparing to come here and thought, well, what am I going to talk about? I'm not a climate scientist, so but I'm an entrepreneur, so I can talk about that. So one of the things I thought, well, let me look at what happened in Glasgow. And I said, what came out of that? Are we making progress? And so I saw, ranges of feedback everywhere from the climate activist, teenager Greta Thunberg, who said there's a lot of blah, blah, blah still going on. And but at the other side, I looked at it and I found a couple things that were very inspirational, and I found very encouraging from an innovator standpoint, and that the UN, as a result of this, has decided to put together a digital global innovation hub, which is a clearinghouse for information and data and partnerships and funding and innovation and collaboration. So that helps. And I also found something, I think the United States, and I'm going to get this, I got a note here, had developed a U.S. Climate Entrepreneurship for Economic Development initiative called SEED. Again, similar reasons to make it easier for innovators. So anytime you can make it easier for innovators to innovate, and entrepreneurs, makes it not only easier to generate significant activities, but it also speeds up the process. So as we're looking for speed in an urgent environment, this is important as well. So one thing that came out of those two discussions was the opportunity to really get much more ambitious and aggressive in terms of our development from solutions for climate change. And so they referred a lot to moonshots. And for those of you that come out of the world of entrepreneurship, moonshots are very interesting. The good news is that they're very transformative versus kind of slow, incremental kinds of approaches. But the challenging news is that they are huge. They're few and far between. They're complicated. They're technical. They're expensive. And so therefore, that leads me into partnerships. So I get part of what this was about. How do we get this done? So who's going to invest in a moonshot, given all those elements? We know we need them, but all the things I listed make it very difficult. So you have to look at government. Obviously, you have to look at, David mentioned, philanthropy is obviously a place to look as well, multinational and big corporations who have funding. And you can look at big, innovative, wealthy individuals like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk and those groups. But you have to have a partnership. Those moonshots are critical, and if we're going to go ahead and increase our odds, we need to kind of go ahead and have more moonshots because, again, risk failure, high risk, high reward, those are all important. So I'll stop here, but I have some other comments about partnerships later if you want to talk about that.
Well, do you think, one thing that occurs to me, do you think there's any opportunity for moonshots that involve more than just domestic, more than just United States elements? Should we do that internationally?
Well, it's interesting you say that because I found two examples. One is what David just mentioned, I'll mention that, but I found two examples in the last couple of days as I was preparing remarks about moonshots. And the first one is an international one, but has U.S. implications, is that I don't know how many of you heard about a company called Sono Motors. That is a German company that I think IPO'd in the NASDAQ this week. And this company, the co-founders, I saw an interview of the co-founders on television, and these guys have developed a business model with an automobile that has solar panels embedded into, or solar cells embedded into the outer body of the automobile, with the goal that they wanted to reduce, significantly reduce, or actually eliminate the need to recharge batteries. So I thought, well, that's pretty cool. So let me look at them a little bit more. And I watched the interview, and so they talked a little bit more about it, and they haven't actually commercialized anything yet, but they IPO'd, and they had 16,000 pre-orders for the vehicles already. And they've gone even farther beyond that. Very innovative, very, very entrepreneurial. They're willing to license their IP to a lot of other companies as well. And they've also decided to really reimagine how they produce automobiles. They're going to outsource it to a lot of different areas. So I'll be interesting to see how successful they are. But just to show that, again, this is a moonshot. This company was 9 years old. And when I watched the interview, I said, boy, these guys are young. And so I went back and looked. 9 years ago, these two co-founders who IPO'd on the NASDAQ were both 18 years old. And they were not car people. They said, we weren't car people, but we know that climate change was a big issue for us, and so how can we make an impact? What can we do? So they began researching, and they, I don't know the whole story, but I found it really intriguing, so you may want to check that out. And then the other thing I mentioned was, again, internationally, and I know that Bob mentioned it this morning, and David just mentioned it, the Bill Gates, TerraPower, I think, is the nuclear prototype that they're looking at, and again, very expensive, but again, a 50-50 public-private relationship. So I think back to your question, Stu, I think this whole globalization issue is pretty critical, because I think there's a lot of technology and a lot of innovation going on, and I think these clearinghouses are going to really speed up the process of cross-border collaboration.
Well, and Bill Gates' modular nuclear reactor development is really a good example also of a form of philanthropy, in the sense that it's his foundation that provided the seed capital for getting the concept at least to the point where other people would be willing to invest. So I think that's a promising start, and it's something for all those billionaires to do with their excess capital. Well, I guess we could turn this over for questions now. You've all been extremely patient. I admire your endurance. Do we have any questions?
I think we started the day with the whole problem being global warming that causes all these conversations, and I think Bob's done a great job of focusing our attention on what the real problem is. I think that the challenge that we have as a country is that we have a divided country, and every time we have an election, we go in a different direction. And then I think that the people underlining that the policies of the two sides of our country don't agree on what the answer is. And I think the conversation needs to start with, the answer is not in the United States. We can lead the world, but we're not the cause of the problem. And if you look at the graphs that came out to begin with, most of the problems coming from countries that have 30–40% of their people starving. They're polluting at a faster and faster rate. So as we come up with financial burdens to our businesses here in our countries, and you want to get 100% of the people on board to support a climate direction, it's hard to do when you're trying to put financial pressure on the businesses of the United States and the people of the United States to solve the world's problems. So I think the conversation needs to start with, how do you get the world on board, which is a hard conversation. Bob and I have had arguments about that India, when 40% of their people are homeless, they're not thinking about it. They're not thinking about, how do we not put garbage in the ocean? So I think that the countries left to do it voluntarily are not going to do it. China, India, and the Asian countries have demonstrated where they're not voluntarily doing it. If you look at the internet today, China's got all kinds of coal-fired plants going up as they're talking about, oh, we're going to cut emissions. They're not doing that. I mean, all they're doing is they're producing cheaper and cheaper electricity, where our politicians are pushing higher and higher electric and power rates on our businesses. It's a conflict, and I think that until you get the world on board, whether it be by, I mean, I don't think China's president or Putin in Russia are being told how to cut and increase their power rates to their factories. They're not doing anything. They're increasing their power rates and reducing from their incomes. And until we lead the way to get the rest of the world on board, we're not going to do this with 5% of the population. And it's got to come from a unified country that says every 4 years or every 6 years or every time we have a policy change, we're going to change direction with our country. How do you get a policy pushed out to the rest of the world? That is a major problem that we're all going to have huge financial problems with. And at this point, we seem to have been the leader of this problem as we run up $30 trillion in debt. And over the next 4 or 5 years, as we have trillions of dollars or hundreds of billions of dollars a year worth of climate problems, all the states go looking to the federal government to solve their financial problems by saying, we need another $400 billion and we need to run up the deficit by another trillions of dollars. Well, as soon as our interest rate goes up, the United States government's not going to be able to help the states out. And unless we get the rest of the world on board, we're just Bob and I have had this conversation, unless we mandate to the rest of the world about getting them on board to fix this problem, we have an issue that is not going to slow down the climate warming.
I foresee a long discussion over beer after the conference is over. I think on that note, I'll hand it back to Rick.